Blazing Reckoning. Paris, 1919. Genevieve Marchand uncovered a weathered map hidden behind an old painting with a route marked in red and the cryptic notation Lieutenant Paul Dubois. Follow my steps. Chapter 1. The Whispers Behind the Canvas. The air in the attic hung thick with dust motes, illuminated by the weak Parisian sunlight filtering through a grimy window. Genevieve Marchand coughed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was May 1919, but the chill of the war years seemed to linger, seeping into the very bones of the city and into her own. She hadn't been warm since before the telegram. The one that had informed her of her brother, Jacques' death at Verdun. The attic of their family home, a once grand but now slightly dilapidated townhouse in the Marais district, had become her refuge. Downstairs, her mother moved through the rooms like a ghost, a pale imitation of the vibrant woman she had once been. Her father, a renowned art dealer before the war, now spent his days staring blankly at canvases, his passion extinguished by the conflict and the loss of his only son. Genevieve had been tasked with sorting through Jacques' belongings. He'd been a budding artist, his canvases filled with pre-war landscapes, vibrant and full of life. A stark contrast to the grim realities he must have faced in the trenches. It was a task she both dreaded and clung to, a way to feel close to him, to somehow piece together the fragments of his shattered life. She ran a gloved hand over a stack of canvases leaning against a wall. Most were familiar, scenes of the Seine, of Notre Dame, of the bustling cafes that had once defined Parisian life. But one canvas was turned towards the wall. Curiosity piqued, Genevieve carefully pulled it free. It was a portrait, unfinished, of a young woman with luminous eyes and a wistful smile. Genevieve didn't recognize her. The style was different, too, more hurried, less refined than Jacques' usual work. Perhaps a model he'd met during his brief leaves? A lover, perhaps? A pang of something akin to jealousy, quickly followed by guilt, stabbed at Genevieve. She had no right to begrudge Jacques any happiness he might have found, however fleeting. As she turned the canvas over, intending to place it with the others, she noticed something odd. The back of the frame felt uneven. Running her fingers along the rough wood, she discovered a small, almost imperceptible gap. With a delicate touch, honed by years of helping her father restore antique frames, she carefully pried the back panel loose. A folded piece of parchment slipped out, falling to the dusty floor. Genevieve picked it up, her heart beating a little faster. The paper was thick and yellowed with age, the edges frayed. As she unfolded it, she realized it was a map. Not a military map, but a detailed street map of Paris, rendered in meticulous detail. A route was marked in thick, crimson ink, winding its way through the city's labyrinthine streets. At the top of the map, written in elegant, spidery handwriting, were the words, Lieutenant Paul Dubois, follow my steps. Genevieve frowned. She didn't recognize the name. Lieutenant Paul Dubois. Who was he? And what were these steps he was meant to follow? The map itself was beautiful, almost too beautiful for a simple guide. Certain landmarks were highlighted with tiny, almost imperceptible symbols, a serpent coiled around a lamppost, a raven perched on a rooftop, a clock face with its hands stopped at precisely 11:11. She examined the route more closely. It started near the Gare du Nord, the train station where so many soldiers had arrived in Paris and so many had departed for the front. It snaked through the city, passing by familiar landmarks, the Louvre, the Palais Royal, the Opera Garnier, but also veering into less familiar quarters, narrow alleyways and forgotten courtyards. The final destination was marked with a small, black cross, located in the Père Lachaise cemetery. A shiver ran down Genevieve's spine. The cemetery. A fitting end, perhaps, for a map found in the belongings of a dead soldier. But why had Jacques hidden it? What was its significance? The scent of old paper and ink mingled with the ever-present dust, creating a heady, almost intoxicating aroma. Genevieve felt a pull, a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. This map, this Lieutenant Dubois, this mysterious route, it was a puzzle, and she was suddenly, desperately determined to solve it. It was a connection, Not just to Jacques, but to the war itself, to the secrets and sorrows that lay buried beneath the surface of the recovering city. She looked back at the portrait of the unknown woman. Her wistful smile seemed to hold a secret, too. Was she connected to the map? To Lieutenant Dubois? Genevieve carefully refolded the map, tucking it into the pocket of her skirt. She knew she couldn't mention it to her parents. They were too fragile, too consumed by their own grief. This was something she had to investigate alone. A solitary mission, driven by a sister's love and a growing sense of unease. The war might be over, but its shadows still stretched long and dark across Paris, and Genevieve was about to step directly into them. The map was more than a path, it was calling her name. What were the consequences if she heeded the cursed whisper? Chapter 2. Lieutenant Dubois's Shadow. The Parisian sunlight, surprisingly bright for a late spring morning, streamed through the arched windows of the Archives Nationales. Genevieve sat at a long, wooden table, surrounded by stacks of dusty files and the hushed whispers of other researchers. The air smelled of old paper and leather, a familiar and comforting scent that reminded her of her father's workshop. Finding information on Lieutenant Paul Dubois was proving more difficult than she had anticipated. The war had created a deluge of records, a vast, chaotic sea of names, dates, and deployments. Millions of men had served, and countless had been lost. Finding one specific lieutenant felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach. She had started with the military records, painstakingly poring over regimental histories and casualty lists. There were dozens of Paul Dubois, but none that seemed to fit the cryptic inscription on the map. She had considered the possibility that lieutenant was a code, a title used within a secret society or espionage ring, but that seemed overly dramatic, even for wartime Paris. Hours passed, and Genevieve's eyes began to ache. She rubbed them with the back of her hand, feeling a growing sense of frustration. She had hoped to find something, anything, that would shed light on Dubois's identity and the purpose of the map. But the records remained stubbornly silent, offering only glimpses into the vast, impersonal machinery of war. A young archivist, a woman with kind eyes and a neatly pinned bun, approached her table. "Mademoiselle Marchand," she said softly, "are you finding everything you need?" Genevieve sighed. "Not really. I'm looking for information on a Lieutenant Paul Dubois, but there are so many I don't even know his regiment or his dates of service." The archivist nodded sympathetically. "The war records are extensive. Do you have any other information? A unit number? A place of birth? Anything at all?" Genevieve hesitated. She was reluctant to reveal the existence of the map, especially to a stranger. But she was desperate. "I have a map," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a street map of Paris, with a route marked on it. It's addressed to a Lieutenant Paul Dubois." The archivist's eyebrows rose slightly. "A map? That's unusual. May I see it?" Genevieve hesitated again, then reached into her bag and carefully withdrew the folded parchment. She unfolded it on the table, smoothing out the creases. The archivist leaned closer, her eyes tracing the crimson route that snaked through the city. "Interesting," she murmured. "This is very detailed. And these symbols," she pointed to the tiny, almost invisible markings that highlighted certain landmarks. "They're not military symbols. They look almost alchemical." Alchemical? Genevieve's heart skipped a beat. Alchemy was a subject that had fascinated Jacques. He had a collection of old books on the subject, filled with strange diagrams and cryptic texts. Could the map be connected to Jacques' interest in alchemy? The archivist tapped a finger on the map. "The handwriting is similar to some of the documents we have from the Section Spéciale." "The Section Spéciale?" Genevieve asked. "It was a clandestine intelligence unit during the war," the archivist explained. "They dealt with espionage, code-breaking, that sort of thing. Their records are highly restricted, but I might be able to access them, given the unusual nature of your request." A flicker of hope ignited within Genevieve. The Section Spéciale. It sounded like exactly the kind of organization that might have produced a map like this. "Would you be able to?" Genevieve asked, her voice filled with a newfound urgency. The archivist smiled. "I can try. It might take some time, and there's no guarantee of success, but I'll see what I can do. Leave the map with me, Mademoiselle Marchand. I'll need it to make my inquiries. Genevieve was hesitant to part with the map, but she knew she had no choice. She trusted the archivist's quiet confidence, her sense that this woman understood the weight of the secrets held within these archives. "Thank you," Genevieve said, her voice thick with emotion. "I appreciate it more than you know." She left the Archives Nationales feeling a mixture of hope and trepidation. The shadow of Lieutenant Dubois was beginning to take shape, shifting from a mere name to a potential member of a secret intelligence unit. The map, she now realized, was far more than a simple guide. It was a key to unlocking a hidden world of espionage and intrigue, a world that had existed alongside the brutal realities of the war. And as she walked back out into the Parisian sunlight, she wondered if she was truly prepared for what that key might unlock. The city held its breath, and she with it, for the archivist represented a bridge between the unknown and the truth. What would tomorrow reveal? Chapter 3. The Cartographer's Secret. The following days were a blur of anxious waiting. Genevieve found it difficult to concentrate on anything other than the map and the mysterious Lieutenant Dubois. She visited the Archives Nationales every afternoon, hoping for news from the archivist, Mademoiselle Dubois, ironically sharing a surname with her query. Each time, she was met with the same polite but firm response. "Not yet, Mademoiselle Marchand. These things take time." She tried to distract herself by sketching, by helping her father in his workshop, but her mind kept returning to the map, to the crimson route that snaked through the city, to the alchemical symbols that hinted at a hidden meaning. She found herself studying Jacques' old alchemy books, poring over the strange diagrams and cryptic texts, searching for any clue that might connect them to the map. One evening, as she sat in her attic room, surrounded by Jacques' canvases and books, she noticed a small, leather-bound journal tucked away on a shelf. She didn't recognize it. It was smaller than Jacques' usual sketchbooks, and the leather was worn and cracked with age. With trembling hands, she opened the journal. The first few pages were blank, but then she found an entry, written in Jacques' familiar handwriting. It was dated July 1916, just months before his death. "The map is almost complete," the entry read. "The symbols are in place, the route is set. But I fear for Paul. He is too trusting, too idealistic. He doesn't see the danger that surrounds us. He believes in the cause, in the power of the Philosopher's Stone, but I fear it will be his undoing." Genevieve's heart pounded in her chest. Paul. Lieutenant Paul Dubois. Jacques knew him. He had helped him create the map. And he had feared for his safety. The Philosopher's Stone. It was a legendary alchemical substance, said to be capable of granting immortality and transmuting base metals into gold. It was a myth, a fairy tale. But Jacques and apparently Paul Dubois had believed in it. The entry continued, "I have hidden the map where only he can find it. I pray it will guide him to safety, to the sanctuary we have prepared. But I fear the serpent is already close, its coils tightening around us." The serpent. It was one of the symbols on the map, coiled around a lamppost near the Louvre. A code, perhaps, for an enemy, a traitor. Genevieve closed the journal, her mind racing. The map was not just a guide to a location, it was a guide to something far more valuable, something that had been worth risking their lives for. The Philosopher's Stone. It seemed impossible, unbelievable. But Jacques' words, his fear for Paul's safety, felt all too real. A knock on the door startled her. It was her father, his face drawn and pale. "Genevieve," he said, his voice trembling, "there's a woman downstairs. She says she has news about Jacques." Genevieve's heart leaped into her throat. It was Mademoiselle Dubois, the archivist. She had found something. She hurried downstairs, her father trailing behind her. Mademoiselle Dubois stood in the hallway, her expression grave. She held a small, sealed envelope in her hand. "Mademoiselle Marchand," she said, "I have some information about Lieutenant Paul Dubois. It's not good news, I'm afraid." Genevieve took the envelope, her hands shaking. She tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a brief, official-looking document, bearing the seal of the Section Spéciale. Lieutenant Paul Dubois, it read, was reported missing in action on October 27, 1916, near Verdun. He is presumed dead. His body was never recovered. The words blurred before Genevieve's eyes. Dead. Paul Dubois was dead. The man Jacques had feared for, the man the map was meant to guide, had perished in the same battle that had claimed her brother's life. But then, why did the map exist? A map to lead a dead man. It made no sense. And yet the feeling, that deep thrum of unease at the base of her neck, said otherwise. Dead did not mean gone. And she began to realize that the map might lead not to the man, but his legacy. A tear escaped her eye. The war's pain had just taken on another ghost. What more would it reveal? Chapter 4. Echoes of the Front Line. The revelation that Lieutenant Paul Dubois was presumed dead sent a wave of despair through Genevieve. It felt like another loss, another connection to Jacques severed. Yet, the mystery of the map and Jacques' journal entry refused to let her give up. If Dubois was dead, what was the purpose of the route, the symbols, the sanctuary Jacques had mentioned? Mademoiselle Dubois, sensing Genevieve's distress, offered a small measure of comfort. The Section Spéciale records are incomplete, she said. Many documents were destroyed or lost during the war. It's possible that Dubois survived, despite the official report, or that the map had a purpose beyond his personal safety. That or hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope. Genevieve clung to it. She had to. She couldn't let the story end here, with another unanswered question, another life lost to the war's insatiable hunger. She decided to follow the map's route herself. It was a long shot, she knew, but she felt a compelling need to retrace Dubois's intended steps, to see the city through his eyes, to understand the meaning of the symbols that marked his path. She started at the Gare du Nord, the bustling train station where so many soldiers had arrived, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and patriotism. The station was still crowded, though now with returning soldiers, many bearing the visible and invisible scars of war. Genevieve imagined Dubois standing here, perhaps waiting for a train, perhaps saying goodbye to a loved one. She followed the crimson line on the map, her eyes scanning the buildings and streets, searching for the first symbol, a raven perched on a rooftop. It took her some time, but she finally found it, a small, almost faded carving of a raven above a narrow doorway on a side street. The doorway led to a dark, seemingly abandoned building. Genevieve hesitated. The building looked derelict, dangerous. But the map and Jacques' journal urged her on. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The interior was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of decay. The only light came from a few grimy windows high above. As her eyes adjusted, she saw that the building had once been a workshop, perhaps a printing press or a bindery. There were remnants of machinery, scattered tools, and piles of rotting paper. She explored the building cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She found nothing of significance, no sign of Dubois, no clue to the map's purpose. Just the echoes of a past life, a life interrupted by the war. As she was about to leave, she noticed a small, wooden box tucked away in a corner. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. She managed to pry it open with a piece of metal she found on the floor. Inside the box, she found a collection of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters were addressed to Lieutenant Paul Dubois, and they were all from the same person, a woman named Elodie Moreau. Genevieve carefully untied the ribbon and opened one of the letters. It was dated August 1916, just a few weeks before Dubois's disappearance. My dearest Paul, the letter began, I received your letter today, and my heart aches with longing for you. I pray for your safety every day, every hour. I know you believe in what you are doing, in the importance of your mission, but I fear for you. The war is a monster, devouring everything in its path. Please, my love, be careful. Come back to me. The letters were filled with love, with fear, with the desperate hope that the war would end and they could be together again. Genevieve felt a pang of sympathy for Elodie Moreau, a woman whose love had been stolen by the war, just like her own brother. Another name, another ghost, another story that made Genevieve question if she had the emotional fortitude for this mission. But there was something else in the letters, something that caught Genevieve's attention. Elodie mentioned a secret project that Du Bois was working on, a project that he believed would change the course of the war. She didn't know the details, but she wrote of his excitement, his dedication, his unwavering belief in its success. The Philosopher's Stone? The sanctuary Jacques had mentioned? Genevieve felt a surge of adrenaline. She was getting closer. She was sure of it. The map was not just a guide to a location, it was a guide to a secret that had been worth fighting for, worth dying for. And Elodie's letters were whispers from beyond, urging her to continue, despite the pain and uncertainty. What was the secret that needed such great sacrifice to find it? Chapter 5. The Serpent's Coil. The discovery of Elodie Moreau's letters fueled Genevieve's determination. She continued to follow the map's route, meticulously searching for the symbols that marked each location. The raven had led her to the abandoned workshop, and the next symbol was the serpent, coiled around a lamppost near the Louvre. The Louvre, once a palace of kings, now housed a vast collection of art and artifacts. Genevieve had visited it many times with her father, but now she saw it through a different lens, as a potential hiding place, a piece of a larger puzzle. She found the lamppost with the serpent carving, its intricate details almost hidden beneath layers of grime and weathering. It stood near one of the less frequented entrances to the museum, an entrance that led to a labyrinthine network of corridors and storage rooms. Genevieve knew she couldn't simply wander through the Louvre, searching for clues. She needed a plan, a way to access the restricted areas without drawing attention to herself. She remembered her father mentioning a former colleague, Monsieur Du Bois as well, who worked as a conservator at the Louvre. Perhaps he could help. She found Monsieur Du Bois in his cluttered workshop, surrounded by ancient pottery shards and restoration tools. He was an elderly man, with a kind face and a twinkle in his eye. He listened patiently as Genevieve explained her quest, her voice carefully modulated to avoid revealing too much. She mentioned Jacques, their shared interest in alchemy, and the mysterious map. She didn't mention Paul Du Bois or the section spéciale. Monsieur Du Bois was intrigued. Alchemy, you say? A fascinating subject. And a map hidden within a painting, it sounds like something out of a novel. He agreed to help her, though with a caution. The Louvre is a vast place, Mademoiselle Marchand, and there are many secrets hidden within its walls. Be careful what you seek. Some secrets are best left undisturbed. He provided her with a temporary pass, allowing her access to the conservation areas, and a rough map of the corridors and storage rooms near the lamppost with the serpent. Stay close to the marked areas, he warned, and avoid the guards. They are vigilant. Genevieve thanked him profusely and set off, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Louvre at night was a different world, a silent, shadowy realm where the echoes of the past seemed to linger in the air. She followed Monsieur Du Bois's map, navigating the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps echoing on the stone floors. She passed by locked doors, behind which lay countless treasures, centuries of history. She felt a sense of awe, but also a growing unease. The Louvre was a beautiful place, but it also felt oppressive, like a giant tomb filled with the ghosts of the past. She finally reached the storage room indicated on her map. It was a large, cavernous space, filled with rows of shelves and crates. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old wood. She began her search, carefully examining the shelves, the crates, the floor, searching for any sign of anything. Hours passed, and she found nothing. Just more dust, more cobwebs, more echoes of the past. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, almost imperceptible inscription on one of the shelves. It was the symbol of the serpent, identical to the one on the lamppost. Beneath the inscription, she found a loose floorboard. She pried it open, her heart racing. Underneath, she found a small, metal box. It was locked, but unlike the box in the workshop, this lock was more sophisticated, more secure. She tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. She needed a key, a special tool, something she didn't have. Frustration washed over her. She was so close, yet so far. As she sat there, staring at the box, she heard a noise behind her. A soft, shuffling sound. She turned around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood in the shadows, a tall, thin man in a dark coat. He held a small, silver object in his hand, something that glinted in the dim light. "Looking for something, mademoiselle?" he asked, his voice a low, menacing whisper. His eyes, dark and piercing, fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He knew. He knew about the map, about the box, about everything. The serpent had found her. And Genevieve could sense she had made a terrible mistake. Chapter 6. A Dance with Deception. Genevieve froze, her mind racing. The man's voice, his stance, the glint of metal in his hand, it all screamed danger. She had to think fast to find a way out of this situation. I was just admiring the craftsmanship, she stammered, gesturing vaguely towards the shelves. "I'm a student of art history." The man didn't seem convinced. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Art history? At this hour? In a restricted area? He knew she was lying. Genevieve's heart pounded against her ribs. She had to try something else, anything. My professor," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "he asked me to examine some of the older storage methods. He's writing a paper on preservation techniques." The man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Indeed? And which professor would that be?" Genevieve's mind went blank. She couldn't think of a single name. She was trapped. Suddenly, the man's expression changed. He tilted his head, as if listening to something. A distant sound, barely audible, reached Genevieve's ears. The sound of footsteps, approaching. The man's eyes darted towards the corridor. He hesitated for a moment, then turned back to Genevieve. "We'll continue this conversation later, mademoiselle," he said, his voice still low but with a hint of urgency. He slipped the silver object into his pocket and quickly moved towards a darkened corner of the storage room, disappearing into the shadows. Genevieve didn't waste a second. She grabbed the metal box, tucked it under her arm, and hurried out of the storage room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know who the approaching footsteps belonged to, but she couldn't risk being caught. She retraced her steps, navigating the corridors as quickly as she could, her mind racing. She had to get out of the Louvre to find a safe place to examine the box. As she reached the entrance where she had come in, she saw a figure approaching. It was Monsieur Dubois, the conservator, his face etched with concern. "Mademoiselle Marchand," he said, "what's wrong? You look pale." Genevieve hesitated, unsure of what to say. She couldn't tell him about the man, about the box. He might be involved somehow. She had to be careful. I got lost," she said, forcing a smile. "It's so easy to get turned around in here." Monsieur Dubois looked at her skeptically, but he didn't press her. "Come," he said, "I'll escort you out." He led her through the corridors and out into the cool night air. Genevieve took a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She was safe, for now. As she walked away from the Louvre, she clutched the metal box tightly. She had no idea what it contained, but she knew it was important. The man's reaction, his sudden disappearance, confirmed it. She needed to find someone she could trust, someone who could help her open the box, someone who understood the dangers she was facing. But who? The city was full of secrets, full of shadows, full of people who might be working against her. This dance with deception was proving more perilous with every step. She had the box, but she knew she had to open it, not only for herself, but also for Jacques and Paul. But how? Chapter 7. The Wounded Soldier's Plea. Genevieve's apartment felt strangely unsafe after her encounter at the Louvre. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more profound. She locked the door and drew the curtains, feeling a sense of vulnerability she hadn't experienced since the darkest days of the war. She placed the metal box on her small kitchen table, its cold, hard surface a stark contrast to the worn wooden tabletop. She stared at it, her mind racing. She needed help, but who could she trust? Her parents were out of the question, too fragile to handle the weight of the secret. Mademoiselle Dubois, the archivist, had been helpful, but she was an official, bound by rules and regulations. Monsieur Dubois, the conservator, was a possibility, but his reaction at the Louvre had made her wary. An idea sparked in her mind. During the war, she had volunteered at a small hospital near her home, tending to wounded soldiers. There was one soldier, a young man named Antoine, who had been particularly kind, particularly grateful for her care. He had lost a leg at the Somme, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had a sharp mind, a quiet strength, and a network of contacts among the veterans, a community forged in the crucible of war. She hadn't seen Antoine since the war ended, but she knew where he lived, in a small apartment building near the Bastille. It was a long shot, but she felt a desperate need to confide in someone who understood the brutal realities of the war and the secrets it had spawned. She wrapped the metal box in a cloth, tucked it into a satchel, and set off, her steps hurried and purposeful. The streets of Paris were relatively quiet at this hour, the only sounds the distant rumble of traffic and the occasional cry of a night bird. She found Antoine's building, a modest, 5-story structure with a faded facade. She climbed the stairs to his apartment on the 3rd floor, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened. Antoine stood there, leaning on a crutch, his face etched with surprise. He had aged, his youthful features now marked by the war's indelible scars, but his eyes still held the same warmth, the same spark of resilience. "Genevieve?" he said, his voice filled with disbelief. What are you doing here?" Genevieve hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "Antoine," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I need your help. It's about my brother, Jacques." Antoine's expression softened. He knew about Jacques' death, had sent her a letter of condolence after the war. He stepped aside, inviting her in. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and tidy. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the room. Antoine gestured towards a worn armchair, and Genevieve sat down, placing the satchel on the floor beside her. She told him everything, her voice faltering at times, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She told him about the map, about Lieutenant Paul Dubois, about the letters, about the encounter at the Louvre, about the metal box. Antoine listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "This is dangerous, Genevieve," he said finally, his voice grave. "The section speciale, they were not to be trifled with. And if this map, this box, if they contain what you think they do," he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Genevieve was playing with fire, and she could get burned. "I know," Genevieve said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I have to do this, Antoine. For Jacques. For Paul Dubois. For Elodie Moreau. For all the lives lost. All the secrets buried."
Antoine nodded slowly.
He understood. He had seen too much death, too much suffering, to dismiss her quest as foolish or reckless. "The box," he said, "you need to open it." Genevieve nodded. "But I need a specialist. Someone who understands locks, mechanisms." Antoine smiled, a faint, wistful smile. "I know just the man," he said. "He was with me in the trenches. A demolition expert. We called him. He could open a safe with a hairpin and a prayer." He reached for a piece of paper and a pencil and scribbled down an address. "His name is Michel," he said. "Tell him I sent you. But be careful, Genevieve. Michel, he's seen a lot. He's not always predictable." He paused before uttering, "And please, for my sake, tell no one else about where you received this assistance." Genevieve took the paper, her hand trembling slightly. A demolition expert. It sounded extreme, but she had no other choice. She thanked Antoine profusely, her heart filled with gratitude. As she walked out of Antoine's building, Genevieve knew. The plea of this wounded soldier had opened a new door, one that had been shut too long. Where would it lead? Chapter 8. Beneath the Parisian moon. The address Antoine had given her led to a narrow, winding street in Montmartre, a district known for its artists, its cabarets, and its bohemian atmosphere. The air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter, a stark contrast to the somber silence of Genevieve's apartment. She found the building, a dilapidated structure with a crumbling facade and a dimly lit entrance. A hand-painted sign above the door read, Michel Dubois Horloger, a clockmaker. It seemed an unlikely profession for a demolition expert. A wave of doubt, the cousin of fear, washed over her again. Was Antoine misleading her? She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and entered. The interior was a small, cluttered workshop, filled with clocks of all shapes and sizes. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the workbench, where a man was hunched over a disassembled clock, his hands moving with a delicate precision. He looked up as she entered, his eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, scrutinizing her with an intensity that made her feel uneasy. He was a small, wiry man, with a shock of white hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. He didn't look like a soldier, let alone a demolition expert. He looked, well, like an eccentric clockmaker. Mademoiselle? He said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Can I help you? Genevieve hesitated again, unsure of how to proceed. I was sent by Antoine, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Antoine from the hospital. The man's expression changed instantly. His eyes narrowed, and a flicker of recognition, perhaps even respect, appeared in their depths. Antoine, he said, his voice softer now. He is well. He's managing, Genevieve said. He said you might be able to help me. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the metal box, placing it on the workbench. The clockmaker examined it, his fingers tracing the intricate lock mechanism. This is not a clock, he said, stating the obvious. This is something else. Genevieve nodded. I don't know what's inside, she said. But I need to open it. It's important. The clockmaker looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to assess her trustworthiness. Antoine trusts you, he said finally. That is enough for me. He reached for a set of tools, a collection of delicate picks and probes, and began to work on the lock. His hands moved with a speed and precision that belied his age, his movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. Genevieve watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence of the workshop was broken only by the ticking of the clocks and the faint clicking of the lock mechanism. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Genevieve felt a bead of sweat trickle down her forehead. She was so close to unlocking the secrets held within the box. Finally, with a soft click, the lock sprung open. The clockmaker carefully lifted the lid, revealing the contents of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was about the size of a jewelry box, and it was decorated with alchemical symbols, the same symbols that had appeared on the map. Genevieve gasped. She recognized the symbols from Jacques' alchemy books. The serpent, the raven, the clock face, and many others she didn't understand. The clockmaker looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. This is dangerous, mademoiselle, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is not a toy. This is something powerful. Genevieve nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She knew. She had known all along. The map, the letters, the encounters, it had all led to this. She reached out and carefully lifted the wooden box from its metal container. It felt strangely warm to the touch, as if it held a life of its own. She looked at the clockmaker, her eyes filled with a question she couldn't quite articulate. He understood. I can open it, he said. But are you sure you want to? Some doors are best left unopened. His words echoed the sentiment shared by the other Dubois she'd met earlier. Genevieve hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I have to. The clockmaker nodded, and with the same delicate precision he had used on the metal box, he began to work on the wooden box, his tools whispering against the ancient wood. The Parisian moon, full and bright, peered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. The secrets were close, and as Genevieve looked at the box, She was terrified of the lid opening and, simultaneously, needed to see it. She had to for the others for the fallen. What demons would be released? Chapter 9. The Price of Redemption. The clockmaker, Michel, worked with a focused intensity that bordered on obsession. The tiny alchemical symbols on the wooden box seemed to guide his hands, his tools moving with an almost supernatural precision. Genevieve watched him, mesmerized, her anxiety battling with a growing sense of anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard a faint click. The lid of the wooden box loosened, and Michel carefully lifted it open. Inside lay a single object, a small, glass vial filled with a shimmering, golden liquid. It glowed with an inner light, casting dancing reflections on the walls of the workshop. Genevieve stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. It was the Philosopher's Stone, or at least what she believed to be the Philosopher's Stone. The legendary substance that Jacques and Paul Dubois had sought, the secret that had cost them their lives. Michel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. I don't know what this is, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But it's powerful. I can feel it. Genevieve reached out and carefully picked up the vial. It felt warm in her hand, almost alive. She held it up to the light, watching the golden liquid swirl and shimmer. Suddenly, the door to the workshop burst open, and two men rushed in, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They were dressed in dark suits, and they held guns. Don't move, one of the men shouted. We're with the Section Speciale. Genevieve froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The Section Speciale. They had found her. The men approached her, their guns trained on her. The taller of the two men, the one who had spoken, reached out and snatched the vial from her hand. So, he said, his voice a low growl, you found it. The Philosopher's Stone. Or, as we prefer to call it, Project Phoenix. Project Phoenix. The name sent a shiver down Genevieve's spine. It sounded ominous. What is it? Genevieve asked, her voice trembling. The man smiled, a cold, cruel smile. It's a weapon, mademoiselle. A weapon of unimaginable power. A weapon that could have won the war for us. A weapon. Not a source of immortality, not a means of transmuting metals, but a weapon. Genevieve felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Jacques and Paul Dubois had died for this, for a weapon. But the war is over, Genevieve said, her voice barely above a whisper. The war is never over, mademoiselle, the man said. There are always new enemies, new threats. And Project Phoenix, it will ensure our victory always. He turned to Michel, who stood frozen, his face pale. You, he said, pointing his gun at the clockmaker. You helped her. You're a traitor. Michel didn't speak. He just stared at the gun, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Genevieve couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Michel be punished for helping her.
No.
She shouted.
He didn't know anything. I forced him to help me.
The man turned back to her, his eyes narrowing. You expect us to believe that? It's the truth, Genevieve said, her voice firm. I threatened him. I told him I would hurt Antoine if he didn't help me. It was a lie, of course, but she had to say something, anything, to save Michel. The man hesitated for a moment, then he smiled again. That same cold, cruel smile. Very well, mademoiselle, he said. We'll take your word for it.
For now.
He gestured to his companion, who grabbed Genevieve's arm, roughly pulling her towards the door. Where are you taking me? Genevieve asked, her voice trembling. Somewhere safe, the man said. Somewhere you can't cause any more trouble. As they dragged her out of the workshop, Genevieve looked back at Michel. He stood there, watching her, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. He knew, and she knew, that this was the price of redemption, the price of uncovering the truth. The Section Speciale had won. Project Phoenix was theirs. And Genevieve was about to disappear. What did safe mean in their terms? Chapter 10. Scars of the Somme. Genevieve was blindfolded and driven for what felt like hours. The car's rough ride, combined with the stifling darkness, left her disoriented and nauseous. She had no idea where she was being taken or what fate awaited her. The section speciale's reputation for ruthlessness preceded them, and she feared the worst. Finally, the car stopped. She was roughly pulled out and led through a series of corridors, the sounds of her footsteps echoing on the stone floors. The air was cold and damp, and she could smell the faint odor of mildew and disinfectant. A prison? A hospital? An asylum? The blindfold was removed, and she found herself in a small, sparsely furnished room. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh, unforgiving light. There was a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table. The walls were painted a dull, institutional gray. A single, barred window offered a glimpse of the night sky, but no clue as to her location. A man entered the room, the same man who had taken the vial from her at Michelle's workshop. He closed the door behind him and stood there, looking at her, his expression unreadable. "You've caused us a great deal of trouble, Mademoiselle Marchand," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. Project Phoenix was meant to remain a secret. Its discovery could have disastrous consequences. Genevieve didn't speak. She just stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "We know about your brother," the man continued. "About his involvement with Lieutenant Dubois. About the map. He knew everything." Genevieve felt a wave of despair wash over her. There was no escape. What are you going to do with me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, that same cold, cruel smile that had haunted her since their first encounter. "That depends, mademoiselle. On you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was Jacques' journal, the one she had found in the attic. "We found this in your apartment," he said. "It seems your brother was quite the diarist." He opened the journal and began to read aloud, his voice mocking, derisive. He read about Jacques' fears for Paul Dubois, about the serpent, about the sanctuary. Genevieve listened, her heart aching with a mixture of grief and anger. He was twisting Jacques' words, using them against her. "Your brother was a fool," the man said, closing the journal. "He believed in fairy tales. He believed in the Philosopher's Stone. He didn't understand the true nature of Project Phoenix." "It's a weapon," Genevieve said, her voice filled with bitterness. "You said so yourself." The man nodded. "A weapon, but also a cure." "A cure?" Genevieve frowned. "A cure for what?" The man hesitated for a moment, then he spoke, his voice lower now, almost confiding. "The war, it changed us, mademoiselle. It left its mark on us, on our bodies, on our minds. Project Phoenix, it can heal those scars. It can restore what was lost." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out another vial, identical to the one he had taken from her. He held it up to the light, watching the golden liquid swirl and shimmer. "I was at the Somme, mademoiselle," he said, his voice filled with a strange mixture of pain and longing. "I saw things, I did things that I can never forget. This can make me whole again." He uncorked the vial and raised it to his lips. Genevieve watched him, horrified. "Don't," she cried. "You don't know what it will do." The man ignored her. He drank the liquid in a single gulp, his eyes closing, his face contorting in a mixture of pain and ecstasy. Then, he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing violently. Genevieve rushed to his side, but there was nothing she could do. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his body went limp. He was dead. The cure had killed him. Genevieve stared at his lifeless body, her mind reeling. Project Phoenix was not a cure, it was a poison. A poison that had claimed another victim. She was alone, trapped in this room, with the body of a dead man and the knowledge of a deadly secret. The scars of the Somme had claimed another life, not on the battlefield, but in this cold, sterile room. And she was left to witness the aftermath. What had become of her life? Chapter 11. The Unsent Letter. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Genevieve's ragged breathing. The man's body lay sprawled on the floor, a stark reminder of the danger she was in. She had to get out, to escape before anyone else arrived. She searched the man's pockets, finding a set of keys and a small, folded piece of paper. The keys, she hoped, would unlock the door to her room, and perhaps other doors as well. The paper, she unfolded it carefully, turned out to be a letter. It was addressed to the man, whose name she now knew from his identification card was Captain Armand Dubois, a relative of the lieutenant, perhaps a brother? The letter was from a woman named Isabel, and it was filled with pleas for him to abandon Project Phoenix, to return to her, to leave the section Speciale behind. My dearest Armand, the letter began, I beg you, please listen to me. This project, it's consuming you. It's turning you into someone I don't recognize. You speak of healing, of restoration, but all I see is destruction. You are obsessed with the past, with the war, with the scars it has left on you. But you cannot change what happened, Armand. You can only move forward. Please, my love, come back to me. Let's build a new life, a life free from the shadows of the war. The letter was dated just a few days earlier. Isabel, whoever she was, had failed to reach him. He had chosen Project Phoenix over her, and it had cost him his life. Genevieve felt a pang of sympathy for Isabel, another woman whose love had been stolen by the war, by its lingering consequences. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, a small act of defiance, a way to honor the woman's plea. She tried the keys on the door, one by one, her heart pounding with each attempt. Finally, one of the keys clicked, and the door swung open. She stepped out into the corridor, her senses on high alert. The building was silent, seemingly deserted. She had no idea where she was or how to find her way out, but she knew she had to keep moving. She followed the corridor, passing by closed doors, each one a potential threat. She tried to remain calm, to think rationally, but fear gnawed at her, threatening to overwhelm her. She reached a staircase and began to descend, her footsteps echoing on the stone steps. She reached the ground floor and found herself in a large, dimly lit hallway. There were several exits, but she didn't know which one to choose. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. Footsteps approaching. She ducked behind a large potted plant, her heart pounding in her chest. Two men walked past, their voices low, their conversation inaudible. They were dressed in the same dark suits as Captain Dubois, clearly members of the section Speciale. Genevieve waited until they were out of sight, then she slipped out from behind the plant and hurried towards one of the exits. She pushed the door open and found herself outside, in a small, enclosed courtyard. The night air was cool and crisp, and the sky was filled with stars. She took a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She was free, at least for the moment. But she knew she wasn't safe. The section Speciale would be looking for her. She had to disappear, to find a place to hide, to figure out what to do next. She had the keys, she had the unsent letter, and she had the knowledge of Project Phoenix's deadly nature. But she was alone, hunted, and running out of time. She looked up at the Parisian sky. What would happen next? Chapter 12. The Spy's Confession. Genevieve knew she couldn't go back to her apartment. The section Speciale would be watching it, waiting for her to return. She needed a safe haven, somewhere she could think, plan, and decide her next move. She thought of Antoine, the wounded soldier, but she couldn't risk endangering him again. Michel, the clockmaker, was also out of the question. She had to find someone else, someone unconnected to the map, to Project Phoenix, to her previous life. An image flashed in her mind, the portrait of the unknown woman, the one she had found with the hidden map. She didn't know who the woman was, but she felt a strange connection to her, a sense that she might hold a key to understanding the mystery. She remembered the style of the painting, the hurried brushstrokes, the wistful smile. It was different from Jacques' usual work, but it reminded her of another artist, a woman named Camille Moreau, who had been a friend of Jacques before the war. Camille was known for her portraits, her ability to capture the essence of her subjects with a few deft strokes. Genevieve had met Camille a few times, at Jacques' exhibitions at social gatherings. She remembered her as a vibrant, independent woman with a sharp wit and a rebellious spirit. She had also been rumored to be involved in the resistance, helping to smuggle information and people across borders. It was a long shot, but Genevieve felt a desperate need to find Camille, to see if she could shed any light on the portrait on the woman, on the connection to Jacques and Paul Dubois. She found Camille's address in an old address book of Jacques, tucked away in a drawer in his studio. It was in a small, unassuming building in the Latin Quarter, a district known for its students, its intellectuals, and its hidden courtyards. She arrived at the building, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She climbed the stairs to Camille's apartment on the top floor, her footsteps echoing on the worn wooden steps. She knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened. Camille stood there, her face etched with surprise. She had aged, her vibrant energy now tempered by a weariness, a sadness that mirrored Genevieve's own. "Genevieve?" she said, her voice filled with disbelief. What brings you here?" Genevieve hesitated, unsure of how to begin. "Camille," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I need your help. It's about Jacques." Camille's expression softened. She knew about Jacques' death, had sent Genevieve a letter of condolence after the war. She stepped aside, inviting her in. The apartment was small and cluttered, filled with paintings, sketches, and art supplies. The air was thick with the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. Camille gestured towards a worn armchair, and Genevieve sat down, feeling a sense of familiarity, a sense of connection to Jacques' world. She told Camille everything, her voice faltering at times, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She told her about the map, about Lieutenant Dubois, about Project Phoenix, about the encounter at the Louvre, about Captain Dubois's death. She showed her the portrait of the unknown woman. Camille listened patiently, her gaze unwavering, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. When Genevieve finished, she remained silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "This is incredible, Genevieve," she said finally, her voice grave. "And dangerous. The section speciale, they are ruthless." She looked at the portrait, her eyes narrowing. I know this woman," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her name is Elodie Moreau." Elodie Moreau. The woman who had written the letters to Paul Dubois. The woman who had loved him, who had feared for his safety. She was a friend of Jacques, Camille continued. And of Paul's. They were all involved in something together. Something secret. Camille hesitated, then she spoke, her voice lower now, almost confiding. "I was a courier for the resistance," she said. "I helped to smuggle information, people, across borders. Jacques and Paul, they were involved too. They were working on something that could have changed the course of the war." She paused, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and shame. I was supposed to meet Paul, the day he disappeared," she said. "He had something for me, something important. But he never showed up. I always feared." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. She felt responsible for Paul's disappearance, for his death. It was a confession of a spy, a confession of a woman tormented by the war. The map, Genevieve said, it was meant to guide him to a sanctuary. Camille nodded. "A place where they could continue their work," she said. "A place safe from the section speciale."
"But Paul is dead," Genevieve said.
"And Captain Dubois, he used Project Phoenix on himself. He died, too." Camille looked at her, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. "The war, it claimed so many victims," she said. "And its secrets, they continue to haunt us." She took Genevieve by the hand. "But you survived. Now what?" Chapter 13. A glimmer of hope. Camille's apartment, filled with the ghosts of artists and revolutionaries, felt like a temporary sanctuary. The shared knowledge of Jacques and Paul's secret work and Camille's own confession created a bond between them, a fragile alliance against the dangers that still lurked. "We need to destroy Project Phoenix," Genevieve said, her voice firm, her resolve strengthened by Camille's support. "It's too dangerous. It can't fall into the wrong hands again." Camille nodded.
"But how?" she asked.
"The section speciale, they will be looking for you. They will be looking for any remaining vials." Genevieve thought of the keys she had taken from Captain Dubois. "He had keys," she said. Keys to wherever they were keeping me. Perhaps there are more vials there. Perhaps there's information, documents, something that can tell us how to destroy it. It was a risky plan, incredibly dangerous, but Genevieve felt she had no other choice. She couldn't let Project Phoenix continue to exist, to claim more victims. Camille hesitated, her eyes filled with concern. "It's too dangerous, Genevieve," she said. "You can't go back there alone." "I won't be alone," Genevieve said. "You'll be with me. You know the city, you know the resistance networks.
You can help me."
Camille looked at her, her expression a mixture of fear and determination.
She knew Genevieve was right.
She couldn't stand by and do nothing. She had a debt to pay, a debt to Jacques, to Paul, to all those who had fought and died for a better world. "All right," she said, her voice resolute. "I'll help you. But we need a plan. We need to be careful. We need to be smart." They spent the rest of the night planning, poring over maps of Paris, discussing possible routes, escape strategies, contingency plans. Camille contacted some of her former resistance contacts, discreetly inquiring about the Section Spéciale's activities, their known locations, their security protocols. The information they gathered was fragmented, incomplete, but it gave them a starting point. They learned that the building where Genevieve had been held was a former military hospital, requisitioned by the Section Spéciale during the war. It was located on the outskirts of Paris, near the Bois de Vincennes, a large park that offered some cover, some potential escape routes. They decided to approach the building at night, under the cover of darkness. Camille's contacts provided them with a rough layout of the building, indicating the location of the main entrance, the guard posts, the likely location of the laboratories where Project Phoenix had been developed. They gathered supplies, dark clothing, ropes, a small crowbar, a first aid kit. Camille even managed to procure a small pistol, a relic from her resistance days. "Just in case," she said, her voice grim. As they prepared to leave, Camille handed Genevieve a small, silver locket. "This belonged to Elodie," she said. "She gave it to me for safekeeping before she disappeared." Genevieve opened the locket. Inside, there was a tiny photograph of Paul Dubois, his face young and hopeful, his eyes filled with a light that had been extinguished by the war. Genevieve felt a surge of emotion, renewed determination to see this through, to honor the memory of Paul and Elodie, to put an end to Project Phoenix once and for all. They set off, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Parisian night was cold and clear, the stars shining brightly above them, a silent witness to their perilous mission. They had a plan. They had each other. They moved forward. A faint glimmer of hope that perhaps they could pull this off and emerge from the shadows began to shine.
Could they?
Chapter 14. The House en Rue Morgue. The journey to the former military hospital was tense and silent. Camille, familiar with the backstreets and alleyways of Paris, guided them through a labyrinthine route, avoiding the main thoroughfares and the watchful eyes of the police and the Section Spéciale. They reached the outskirts of the Bois de Vincennes, the sprawling park offering a cloak of darkness. The hospital loomed ahead, a large, imposing structure, its windows dark and lifeless, its silhouette casting a long, ominous shadow. They approached cautiously, staying close to the trees, their senses on high alert. They could hear the faint sounds of the city in the distance, but here, surrounded by the woods, it felt like they were in another world, a world of secrets and danger. They circled the building, observing the guard posts, the patrols, the possible entry points. Camille's contacts had been right. The security was tight, but not impenetrable. There was a small, seemingly unguarded gate at the rear of the building, leading to a service entrance. It was their best bet. They waited, hidden in the shadows, until the patrol passed, then they moved swiftly and silently towards the gate. Camille, using the small crowbar, expertly picked the lock, and they slipped inside. They found themselves in a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The air was stale and cold, and the silence was unnerving. They followed the layout Camille's contacts had provided, navigating the maze of corridors and rooms, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floors. They reached the section of the building that had housed the laboratories. The doors were locked, but Genevieve had the keys she had taken from Captain Dubois. She tried them, one by one, her heart pounding with each attempt. Finally, one of the keys clicked and a door swung open. They stepped inside and Genevieve gasped. The room was a shambles. Equipment lay smashed on the floor, papers were scattered everywhere, and the air was thick with the smell of chemicals and decay. It looked like a scene of a violent struggle, a desperate attempt to destroy evidence. "They knew we were coming," Camille whispered, her voice filled with alarm. "They've cleared out." Genevieve felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. Had they come all this way for nothing? Were there no remaining vials of Project Phoenix? No information on how to destroy it? She began to search the room, carefully sifting through the debris, hoping to find something, anything, that might be of use. Camille joined her, her eyes scanning the room, her movements quick and efficient. They found fragments of documents, torn and burned, but nothing legible. They found broken vials, empty containers, but no sign of the golden liquid. Genevieve was about to give up when she noticed something tucked away in a corner, behind an overturned cabinet. It was a small, metal box, similar to the one she had found at the Louvre, but this one was undamaged, its lock still intact. She called Camille over, and together, they lifted the cabinet and retrieved the box. Genevieve tried the keys, but none of them fit. Camille examined the lock, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is a different type of lock," she said. "More sophisticated. I don't know if I can open it." Genevieve felt a surge of frustration. They were so close, yet so far. Suddenly, Camille smiled, a faint, glimmering smile.
"Wait," she said.
"I have an idea." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, intricately carved hairpin. It was a beautiful piece of jewelry, seemingly out of place among their tools and weapons. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said. "She was a locksmith of sorts. She taught me a few tricks." She inserted the hairpin into the lock and began to work, her hands moving with a delicate precision, her movements almost invisible to the eye. Genevieve watched her, mesmerized, her hope rekindled. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Genevieve held her breath, waiting for the telltale click. Finally, it came. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, but it was enough. The lock sprung open. Camille carefully lifted the lid, revealing the contents of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single vial of Project Phoenix, its golden liquid shimmering in the dim light. And beneath it, a folded document. This old house on a street that inspired Poe had given up a prize. But what did it mean? Chapter 15. The Clockmaker's Enigma. Genevieve carefully lifted the vial of Project Phoenix from the box, its golden light casting an ethereal glow on her face. It was beautiful and terrifying, a symbol of hope and destruction, a testament to the war's twisted legacy. Camille unfolded the document, her hands trembling slightly. It was written in a dense, scientific language, filled with formulas, diagrams, and technical jargon. It was clearly a detailed description of Project Phoenix, its composition, its effects, its potential applications. I don't understand any of this," Camille said, her voice filled with frustration. "It's too technical. We need someone who understands chemistry, biology, someone who can decipher this." Genevieve thought for a moment. She needed an expert, someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by the section speciale or the dangers of Project Phoenix. An image flashed in her mind. Michel, the clockmaker, the demolition expert Antoine had recommended. He was eccentric, yes, but he was also incredibly intelligent, with a deep understanding of mechanisms, of how things worked. He might be able to make sense of the document. "I know someone," Genevieve said. "He's a clockmaker. But he's very clever. He might be able to help us." Camille looked at her skeptically. "A clockmaker? Are you sure?" "He helped us open the first box," Genevieve said. He's more than he seems." They decided to return to Michel's workshop, taking the vial and the document with them. It was a risky move, exposing themselves to the section speciale again, but they felt they had no other choice. They left the hospital, retracing their steps through the bois de Vincennes, their senses on high alert. They reached the city streets and made their way back to Montmartre, to Michel's hidden workshop. They arrived at the clockmaker's shop, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened. Michel stood there, his eyes magnified by his thick spectacles, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. He had clearly not expected to see them again. "Genevieve?"
Camille?
he said, his voice filled with disbelief. What is going on?" They explained everything, showing him the vial and the document, telling him about their discovery at the hospital, about their need for his expertise. Michel listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, his expression growing increasingly serious. When they finished, he remained silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "This is very dangerous," he said finally, his voice grave. "Project Phoenix, it's not something to be trifled with." "We know," Genevieve said. "But we need to understand it. We need to find a way to destroy it." Michel hesitated. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll help you. But it will take time. This document, it's complex. It's an enigma." He led them into his workshop, clearing a space on his workbench. He carefully examined the document, his fingers tracing the formulas and diagrams, his eyes scanning the dense text. He worked for hours, surrounded by his clocks, his tools, his intricate mechanisms. Genevieve and Camille watched him, their anxiety growing with each passing moment. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the window, Michel looked up, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and horror. "I understand it now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Project Phoenix, it's not a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It's a catalyst." "A catalyst?" Genevieve and Camille exchanged puzzled looks. "It accelerates cellular regeneration," Michel explained. "It can heal wounds, repair damaged tissue, even reverse aging. But it's unstable. It's unpredictable. It can also cause uncontrolled growth, mutations, deformities." He paused, his voice trembling. It's like playing God," he said. "And the consequences, they can be catastrophic." He looked directly at Genevieve, "And the only way to neutralize it is to destroy the original formula and all samples. The formula itself is hidden." Genevieve's mind raced. The original formula. Hidden. Where? The document didn't say. It was another puzzle, another enigma, another clock to take apart, piece by piece. Where to start, when the sun was rising and the new day was bringing its own dangers? Chapter 16. Betrayal in the Garden. Michel's revelation that Project Phoenix was a catalyst, not a weapon, and that the original formula was hidden, left Genevieve and Camille reeling. They needed to find the formula, to destroy it along with the remaining vial, to finally put an end to the project's deadly legacy. "The map," Genevieve said suddenly, her mind racing. The alchemical symbols, they weren't just a guide to locations. They were clues. Clues to the formula. She remembered Jacques' journal entry, his mention of the Philosopher's Stone, his fear that the serpent was close. The symbols on the map, she realized, were not just random markings, they were a code, a cipher, designed to protect the formula from falling into the wrong hands. "We need to go back to the beginning," Genevieve said. "To the map. To the route. To the symbols." They decided to retrace the map's route, this time not just searching for physical locations, but for clues, for hidden messages, for anything that might lead them to the formula. They started again at the Gare du Nord, the first point on the map. They revisited the abandoned workshop, where Genevieve had found Elodie Moreau's letters. They searched the building again, meticulously examining every nook and cranny, every loose floorboard, every crack in the wall. They found nothing. They moved on to the Louvre, to the lamppost with the serpent carving. They revisited the storage room, where Genevieve had encountered the section's speciale agent. They searched the room again, carefully examining the shelves, the crates, the floor. They found nothing. They continued to follow the map's route, visiting each location marked by a symbol, searching, probing, questioning. They found nothing but dust, cobwebs, and the echoes of the past. Frustration and despair began to creep in. Were they chasing a ghost? Was the formula lost forever? The final destination on the map was the Père Lachaise cemetery, marked by a small, black cross. It was a fitting end, perhaps, for a journey filled with death and secrets. They arrived at the cemetery, the sprawling city of the dead stretching out before them, its tombstones and mausoleums casting long, somber shadows. They followed the map's route, navigating the winding paths, passing by the graves of famous artists, writers, musicians, and countless forgotten souls. They reached the location marked by the cross. It was a small, unassuming plot, with a simple headstone bearing the name, Elodie Moreau. Genevieve gasped. Elodie Moreau, the woman who had loved Paul Du Bois, the woman whose letters had guided Genevieve on this quest. She was buried here, in this forgotten corner of the cemetery. They stood there, in silence, paying their respects to the woman whose life had been tragically cut short by the war and its secrets. Suddenly, Camille gasped. "Look," she said, pointing to the headstone. Genevieve followed her gaze. On the headstone, beneath Elodie Moreau's name and dates, there was a small, almost imperceptible inscription. It was a series of alchemical symbols, identical to the ones on the map. Genevieve's heart leaped into her throat. The formula. It was here, hidden in plain sight, on Elodie Moreau's grave. But as she reached out to touch the inscription, a voice behind her said, "I wouldn't do that, mademoiselle." They turned around, their hearts pounding in their chests. Standing there, a few feet away, was Antoine, the wounded soldier, the man who had helped Genevieve find Michel, the man she had trusted. He held a gun, and his expression was cold, devoid of the kindness, the warmth she had seen before.
"Antoine?"
Genevieve said, her voice filled with disbelief. What are you doing?"
Antoine Smiled, a cruel, mocking smile.
"I'm afraid I've been playing you, Genevieve," he said. From the very beginning. He was the serpent, the traitor Jacques had feared. He had been working for the Section Spéciale all along, using Genevieve to lead him to the formula. He had been so near, and yet so far, so trusted and so wrong. The betrayal stung, sharp and deep. How could she be so mistaken? Chapter 17. The Forgotten Promise. The shock of Antoine's betrayal hit Genevieve like a physical blow. The man she had trusted, the man who had seemed to understand her pain, her grief, her quest for justice, had been manipulating her all along.
"Why, Antoine?"
Genevieve asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Why would you do this?" Antoine's smile widened, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculating light. "The war, it changed us all, Genevieve," he said. "It made us realize what's truly important.
Power.
Control. Survival." He gestured with the gun towards the headstone. "Project Phoenix, it's the key to all of that. It's the future. And I intend to be a part of it." "You're working for the Section Spéciale," Genevieve said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Antoine nodded.
"They offered me a chance. A chance to be more than just a cripple, a forgotten soldier. A chance to be powerful." He took a step closer, his gun trained on Genevieve. "Now hand over the vial," he said. "And the document." Genevieve hesitated. She knew she had no choice. He had the gun, he had the advantage. But she couldn't just give up, not after everything she had been through, not after all the sacrifices that had been made. Camille, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Antoine," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "Don't do this. This isn't you. This isn't the man I knew, the man who fought so bravely for his country." Antoine's expression flickered for a moment, a hint of doubt, perhaps even regret, crossing his face. But it was quickly replaced by his cold, determined mask. "The war changed me, Camille," he said. "It made me realize that ideals, patriotism, they're just words. Empty words. The only thing that matters is power." He turned back to Genevieve. "The vial," he repeated, his voice harder now. "And the document."
"Now."
Genevieve reached into her bag and slowly pulled out the vial of Project Phoenix. She held it up, the golden liquid shimmering in the fading light. This isn't power, Antoine," she said. "It's poison. It destroys everything it touches. It killed Captain Dubois. It will kill you too.
Antoine Loguet, à Arche, Cynical Log.
You think I care about that? I've already lost everything. My leg, my future, my hope.
This is my chance to get it back. To be whole again.
He reached out to take the vial, but Genevieve pulled it back.
There's something you should know, Antoine, she said.
Something Jacques told me in his journal. Something about a forgotten promise.
Antoine frowned.
What are you talking about? Jacques and Paul Dubois, they made a promise, Genevieve said. A promise to Elodie Moreau. A promise to use Project Phoenix for good, to heal, to restore, not to destroy. She looked at the headstone, at the alchemical symbols inscribed on its surface. They hid the formula here, on her grave, as a testament to that promise. A promise you're about to break. Antoine's expression changed again, a flicker of uncertainty, of confusion, crossing his face. He remembered Elodie. He had known her, too. He had been part of their group, their secret mission. Elodie, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Genevieve saw her chance. She quickly uncorked the vial and, before Antoine could react, she hurled the golden liquid onto the headstone, onto the alchemical symbols. The liquid reacted instantly, sizzling and smoking as it came into contact with the stone. The symbols began to glow, then to fade, then to disappear completely. The formula was gone. Destroyed. Antoine stared at the headstone, his face a mask of shock and rage. He had been so close to achieving his goal, and now it was gone forever. He raised the gun, pointing it at Genevieve. You'll pay for this, he said, his voice trembling with fury. But before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. Antoine staggered, his eyes widening in surprise. Then he collapsed to the ground, the gun falling from his hand. Standing behind him, a smoking pistol in her hand, was Camille. She had acted without hesitation, protecting Genevieve, putting an end to Antoine's betrayal. It had come down to a choice, and she had chosen. The promise was upheld by one, betrayed by another. Which one was she? Chapter 18. The Raven's Flight. The echo of the gunshot reverberated through the silent cemetery, a stark punctuation mark to the unfolding drama. Antoine lay motionless on the ground, his betrayal silenced, his dreams of power shattered. Genevieve stared at Camille, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude. Camille had saved her life, but at a terrible cost. Taking a life, even to protect another, was a burden that would weigh heavily on her conscience. Camille lowered the pistol, her hand trembling slightly. She looked at Antoine's body, her expression a mixture of sadness and regret. She hadn't wanted to kill him, but she had seen no other choice. We need to go, Camille said, her voice urgent. The gunshot, it will attract attention. Genevieve nodded, her mind racing. They had destroyed the formula, they had neutralized Project Phoenix, but they were still in danger. The Section Speciale would be looking for them, and now they had Antoine's death to contend with. They quickly left the cemetery, their footsteps hurried and purposeful. They needed to disappear, to find a safe place to hide, to figure out their next move. As they walked, Genevieve noticed something clutched in Antoine's hand. It was a small, silver object, intricately carved in the shape of a raven. She recognized it instantly. It was the symbol of the raven, the first symbol on the map, the one that had led her to Elodie Moreau's letters. She carefully pried it from Antoine's grip. It was a locket, and as she opened it, she found a tiny, folded piece of paper. She unfolded the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a message, written in Paul Dubois's handwriting. If you are reading this, the message began, then I am gone. The serpent has betrayed us. The formula is hidden, protected by the symbols. Trust no one. Follow the raven's flight. The raven's flight. It was a final clue, a final message from Paul Dubois, a guide to something. But what? Where? Genevieve looked at Camille, her eyes filled with a renewed sense of hope. They had destroyed the formula, but the mystery was not yet over. There was still something to find, something to uncover. We need to go back to Michel's, Genevieve said. He's the only one we can trust. He might be able to help us understand this. They made their way back to Montmartre, to Michelle's hidden workshop, their journey filled with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. They arrived at the clockmaker's shop, their hearts pounding with a sense of urgency. They knocked on the door, and after a moment it opened. Michel stood there, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw them. He had clearly not expected their return. "Genevieve?"
Camille?
he said, his voice filled with concern. "What happened? Are you all right?" They explained everything, showing him the Raven locket and Paul Dubois's message, telling him about Antoine's betrayal, about Camille's desperate act of self-defense. Michel listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, his expression growing increasingly serious. When they finished, he remained silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "The Raven's flight," he whispered, his voice barely audible. It's a metaphor, a symbol of escape, of freedom." He examined the locket, his fingers tracing the intricate carving of the raven. "This is a key," he said. "A key to something hidden. Something Paul Dubois wanted to protect." He looked at Genevieve, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and concern. "We need to follow the raven's flight," he said. "We need to find where it leads." He paused, his gaze fixed on the locket. I think I know where to start," Michel said, and motioned them inside. The raven had flown. Where would it land? Chapter 19. Ashes and Remembrance. Michel's words, "I think I know where to start," hung in the air, a fragile promise of resolution. He led Genevieve and Camille to his workbench, the familiar clutter of tools and clock parts offering a strange sense of comfort in the midst of their perilous situation. He carefully examined the raven locket, turning it over and over in his hands, his fingers tracing the intricate details of its carving. He then pulled out a magnifying glass and a small, delicate probe. "This locket, it's more than just a piece of jewelry," he said. "It's a mechanism, a miniature lock." He began to work, his hands moving with the same precision and expertise he had displayed when opening the metal and wooden boxes. Genevieve and Camille watched him, their breath held captive in their chests, their hopes rising with each click and whir of the tiny mechanism. After several minutes of intense concentration, Michel let out a soft exclamation. "There," he said. "I've got it." He carefully opened the locket, revealing not a photograph, as they had expected, but a small, hollow compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a tiny, rolled-up piece of parchment. Genevieve's heart leaped into her throat. This was it, the final clue, the end of the raven's flight. Michel carefully removed the parchment and unrolled it. It was a small, hand-drawn map, but unlike the previous map, this one was not of Paris. It was a map of a building, a specific location. This is the sanctuary," Genevieve whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The place Jacques mentioned in his journal. The place where Paul Dubois was supposed to go." Camille leaned closer, examining the map. "But where is it?"
she asked.
"There are no landmarks, no street names, no identifying features." Michel studied the map, his brow furrowed in thought. It's a familiar layout," he said. "I've seen this before somewhere." He paused, his eyes widening in recognition. "Wait a minute," he said. "I know this building. It's the old Dubois family estate, outside of Paris, near Fontainebleau. The Dubois family estate, Paul Dubois's ancestral home, the place where he had grown up, where he had dreamed of a better world, where he had planned a secret mission with Jacques and Elodie. It made perfect sense. The sanctuary, the place of refuge, the final destination of the raven's flight, was Paul Dubois's own home. "We need to go there," Genevieve said, her voice firm, her resolve strengthened by this new discovery. "We need to find out what Paul Dubois was protecting." They decided to leave immediately, under the cover of darkness. Michel, despite his age and his reluctance to leave his workshop, insisted on accompanying them. He felt a responsibility, a connection to Paul Dubois, to the secrets they were uncovering. They traveled by train, then by foot, reaching the outskirts of Fontainebleau as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky. The Dubois estate was located on a secluded hilltop, surrounded by a dense forest, its once grand facade now weathered and overgrown, a testament to time and neglect. They approached cautiously, their senses on high alert. The estate seemed deserted, abandoned, but they knew that appearances could be deceiving. The section speciale could still be watching, waiting. They found a hidden entrance, a small, overgrown gate at the rear of the estate. Michel, using his skills, quickly picked the lock, and they slipped inside. They followed the map, navigating the overgrown gardens, the crumbling pathways, the silent, watchful statues. They reached the main building, a large, imposing structure, its windows dark and empty, its doors sealed shut. They found another entrance, a small, wooden door hidden beneath a tangle of ivy. Michel, again, used his skills to open the lock, and they stepped inside. The interior was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. They moved slowly, cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They followed the map, navigating the maze of corridors and rooms, their hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. They reached the room indicated on the map, a large, paneled library, its shelves lined with ancient books, its walls adorned with faded portraits. In the center of the room, there was a large, stone fireplace. And above the fireplace, there was a painting of a raven in flight. Genevieve knew, instantly, that this was it. The final destination. The secret Paul Dubois had sought to protect. She approached the fireplace, her hands trembling slightly. She examined the painting, searching for a hidden mechanism, a secret compartment. She found it. A small, almost imperceptible button, concealed within the raven's eye. She pressed the button, and with a soft click, a section of the wall behind the painting slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside the chamber, there was a small, wooden chest. Genevieve carefully lifted the chest and opened it. Inside, there was no gold, no jewels, no weapons. There were only books, documents, letters. The true legacy of Paul Dubois. His research. His ideals. His dream of a better world. And on one of the pieces of paper, the formula to safely neutralize Project Phoenix, including the remaining sample. Genevieve felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of relief, sadness, and gratitude. The journey had been long and perilous, filled with betrayal, loss, and sacrifice. But it was finally over. The secrets had been revealed. The truth had been found. She looked at Camille and Michel, her companions, her allies, her friends. They had done it. Together. They gathered everything, even taking the ashes from the fireplace as a symbolic gesture. Paul was truly gone. This was his legacy, his home.
What would be their next step?
Chapter 20. The Heart's True North. With the contents of the hidden chamber secured, Genevieve, Camille, and Michel left the Dubois estate, their hearts heavy with the weight of their discoveries, yet buoyed by a sense of accomplishment. They had faced betrayal, danger, and death, but they had emerged victorious, armed with the knowledge and the means to finally put an end to Project Phoenix. Their immediate priority was to destroy the remaining vial of the catalyst, using the formula they had found in Paul Dubois's research. Michel, with his understanding of chemistry and his meticulous attention to detail, took the lead, carefully following the instructions outlined in the document. They gathered the necessary materials, working in a secluded corner of Michel's workshop, the familiar ticking of the clocks a soothing counterpoint to the tension they felt. The process was delicate and precise, requiring absolute concentration and unwavering focus. Finally, after several hours of painstaking work, the vial of Project Phoenix was neutralized, its shimmering golden liquid transformed into a harmless, inert substance. They had done it. They had eradicated the threat, silenced the deadly legacy of the war. With Project Phoenix neutralized, Genevieve felt a sense of closure, a release from the burden she had carried for so long. But there was still one more task to complete, one more promise to fulfill. She wanted to honor the memory of Paul Dubois, of Elodie Moreau, of Jacques, of all those who had been caught up in the web of secrets and sacrifice. She wanted to create a lasting memorial, a testament to their courage, their ideals, their dream of a better world. She decided to use the Du Bois estate, Paul's ancestral home, as the foundation for this memorial. She envisioned a place of healing, of learning, of remembrance, a place where the scars of the war could be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately transcended. She shared her vision with Camille and Michel, and they embraced it wholeheartedly. They pooled their resources, their skills, their connections, working together to transform the dilapidated estate into a vibrant center of hope and reconciliation. Camille, with her artistic talent and her resistance network contacts, organized exhibitions, workshops, and cultural events, attracting artists, writers, musicians, and intellectuals from all over France. The estate became a haven for creativity, a place where the wounds of the war could be expressed, explored, and healed through art. Michel, with his technical expertise and his meticulous attention to detail, oversaw the restoration of the building and the grounds, transforming the crumbling structure into a beautiful and functional space. He also established a small museum, showcasing the documents and artifacts they had found in the hidden chamber, telling the story of Paul Du Bois, of Project Phoenix, of the sacrifices that had been made. Genevieve, with her organizational skills and her unwavering determination, managed the day-to-day operations of the estate, ensuring its smooth functioning and its long-term sustainability. She also established a foundation dedicated to supporting veterans, to promoting peace, to fostering understanding between different cultures and communities. The Du Bois estate, once a symbol of secrets and shadows, became a beacon of light, a testament to the power of hope, of resilience, of the human spirit. It was a living memorial, a place where the past could be remembered, the present celebrated, and the future embraced. As Genevieve stood on the hilltop, overlooking the revitalized estate, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with pain and loss, but it had also led her to a deeper understanding of herself, of the world, of the enduring power of love and loyalty. She had found her heart's true north, her purpose, her calling. She had honored the memory of those who had been lost, and she had created something beautiful, something meaningful, something that would endure. The map had been cursed, but it had led her to her destiny. The war was over, and it was time to start anew, to rebuild, to heal. This time it was her turn. She finally knew where she stood. She looked up to the evening sky, knowing Jacques would be proud. Would anyone ever know the truth, the full story?
It didn't matter. She knew, and a select few.
That was enough. Epilogue. Years passed. The Du Bois estate, now known as the Maison de la Paix House of Peace, flourished. It became a renowned center for arts, culture, and reconciliation, attracting visitors from all over the world. The scars of the war, though still visible, began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of hope and renewal. Genevieve, now a mature woman with silver threading her hair, remained the heart and soul of the Maison de la Paix. She dedicated her life to its mission, to honoring the memory of those who had been lost, to fostering a spirit of understanding and cooperation among people of all backgrounds. Camille, her artistic talent undiminished by age, continued to create, to inspire, to use her art as a means of healing and communication. Her paintings, filled with vibrant colors and evocative imagery, adorned the walls of the Maison de la Paix, a testament to the enduring power of creativity. Michel, though his hands were now gnarled with age, continued to tinker, to repair, to maintain the intricate mechanisms of the estate. He became a beloved figure, a symbol of resilience, of the enduring human capacity for ingenuity and craftsmanship. He had finally found a home. The story of Project Phoenix, of the cursed map, of the sacrifices that had been made, became a legend, whispered among the visitors and staff of the Maison de la Paix. It was a reminder of the darkness that had once engulfed the world, but also of the light that had ultimately triumphed. One sunny afternoon, Genevieve was sitting in the garden, overlooking the estate, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her face. A young woman, a student visiting from America, approached her. "Excuse me, Madame Marchand," the young woman said, her voice filled with admiration. "I've heard so much about you, about the Maison de la Paix. It's truly inspiring." Genevieve smiled. "Thank you, my dear," she said. "It's been a long journey, but a worthwhile one." The young woman hesitated, then she asked, "Is it true the story about the map? About the secret project? About the Philosopher's Stone?" Genevieve looked at her, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and wisdom. "Some stories are best left as legends, my dear," she said. "But what is true is that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of healing, of reconciliation, of building a better world." The young woman nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. She thanked Genevieve and walked away, leaving the older woman alone with her thoughts. Genevieve looked out over the estate, at the vibrant gardens, at the bustling buildings, at the faces of the people who had come to find solace, inspiration, and connection. She felt a profound sense of peace, of fulfillment. She had found her heart's true north. She had honored the past, embraced the present, and created a future filled with hope. The cursed map had led her on a long and perilous journey, but it had ultimately led her home. To her own self, to the peace that had always eluded her. It was enough. It was everything. She closed her eyes and leaned back, and the warm sunlight and memories became one. The journey was over, but the legacy was eternal.